Our latest episode of CyberWire X drops on Sunday, July 11th, and features conversations about APTs targeting Linux in the cloud. Join Rick Howard as he discusses this with the hash table, and hear my interview with El Marquez from our sponsor, Interos. Targeted phishing attacks are on the rise industry-wide, forcing companies to pay millions toward ransomware attacks. Inky uses innovative technology that integrates with existing security to provide protection against incoming phishing threats. One customer reported that clicks on malicious links were reduced by 20% in 1 month after Inky was installed. Inky catches fish before they breach your network. Don't take our word for it. See for yourself at www.inky.com. Kaseya continues to work through remediation of the VSA vulnerability exploited by REvil, with completion expected Sunday afternoon. And while REvil has made a nuisance of itself, this time they may not have seen a big payday, at least not yet. The U.S. is still considering its retaliatory and other options in the big ransomware case. China's MSS is active against targets in Asia. Andrea Little Limbago from Interos looks at government access to data analysis. Our guest is Leon Gilbert from Unisys with data from their Digital Workplace Insights report. And scammers are baiting their hooks with Black Widow lures. From the CyberWire studios at Data Tribe, I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire summary for Friday, July 9th, 2021. We begin with an update on REvil's exploitation of Kaseya's VSA. Kaseya CTO Dan Timpson posted a video late yesterday afternoon in which he provided a high-level overview of the steps the company was taking to fix the problems with its VSA software, whose modular design he credited with helping limit the scope of the attacks by REvil. Timpson made a point of listing the organizations Kaseya was working with as it responded to the ransomware attack. Mandiant, including its affiliate FireEye, the FBI, CISA, and DIVD, as well as with partners, customers, and researchers. Kaseya has fixed the vulnerabilities in both on-premises and cloud versions of VSA, he said, documented the updates, and had them peer-reviewed by the partners the company has engaged. A post on Kaseya's site indicates that patches for VSA's on-premises version are still scheduled for release this coming Sunday, July 11th at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. That's also when Kaseya intends to begin deploying the fixes to its VSA software-as-a-service infrastructure. There's some question as to how successful the responsible REvil affiliate has actually been this time around. It's clearly succeeded at infecting both direct customers of Kaseya as well as those customers' customers, the downstream victims of nth-party risk. The Wall Street Journal reports that ransomware infestations connected with the exploitation of Kaseya had, by yesterday, been found in 6 European countries. The Record reports that Kaseya's president and general manager for EMEA, Ronan Kirby, addressing a meeting convened by Belgium's CERT. Those 6 countries were the UK, the Netherlands, Germany, Sweden, Norway, and Italy. 8 of the 60 direct customers affected by the campaign are in Europe. Kaseya still thinks there are between 800 and 1,500 total downstream victims, that is, customers of the MSPs who use Kaseya's VSA. But it's not clear how well the extortionists have actually done in collecting the ransom they've demanded. Bleeping Computer has found only 2 victims who've paid any ransom at all, and so concludes that the responsible REvil affiliate is unlikely to get the big payday they're hoping for. REvil went after the software itself, the better to cast a broad net, and so passed up the now customary step of wiping or encrypting backups. So the victims may have simply opted to restore from backups and bite the bullet on any doxing that may develop later. Unless, of course, there's some under-the-radar GoFundMe campaign that's quietly raising the $50 million the bad guys want. No, that's not going to happen. A U.S. response to the ransomware campaign remains under consideration. Security Week writes that the U.S. administration faces pressure to do something about REvil's campaign, and it's clear that doing something increasingly means taking a whack at Russian interests, with U.S. military organizations doing a good bit of the whacking. The Pentagon has been circumspect about what it might be called upon to do. A Defense Department spokesman on Tuesday declined to discuss specific U.S. Cyber Command capabilities, plans, or infrastructures. The spokesman said, quote, "We are all mindful of these growing threats to national security as well as to civilian infrastructure. We believe a U.S. response to those threats has got to be whole of government," end quote, as opposed to a purely military response. In this case, whole of government would probably mean, especially, the intelligence community and the Departments of State, Justice, Treasury, and Commerce. More coverage of this incident can be found on our CyberWire website. Recorded Future's Insict Group reports finding what appears to be a Chinese cyber espionage campaign active against targets in Nepal, Taiwan, and the Philippines. The threat group, which Recorded Future tracks as Threat Activity Group 22, Tag 22, is interested in telecommunications, academic, research and development, and government organizations in the three countries. It's also taken an interest in an airport and a university located in Hong Kong. The researchers believe Tag 22 used compromised Glassfish servers and Cobalt Strike for initial access, subsequently switching to its own bespoke backdoors for long-term persistence. They see some overlap with other activity other research groups have tracked. In particular, the infrastructure and the malware used against the targets in Hong Kong are significantly similar to WinT Group activity reported by ESET and NTT Group. There are also some commonalities with the operation against the Mongolian certificate authority MonPass that Avast described, especially the deployment of Cobalt Strike. The ShadowPad and WinT backdoors that were used to establish persistence have been used by the operators FireEye calls APT41 and that Microsoft calls Barium. WinT has been a particular favorite of contractors working for China's MSS, its Ministry of State Security. The different operations have different objectives, but the campaign against targets in Taiwan seems most clearly focused on industrial espionage pursued in the interest of furthering Beijing's economic goals. Microsoft has issued a clarification regarding the patch it issued this week for the CVE 2021-34-527 Windows Print Spooler vulnerability, that's Print Nightmare. Redmond says the patch is working as designed and urges users to apply it. The Microsoft Security Response Center investigated reports that the patch was ineffective and concluded that, quote, "All reports we have investigated have relied on the changing of default registry settings related to point and print to an insecure configuration," end quote. And finally, devotees of the Marvel Universe, are you looking forward to the new Black Widow movie? It premieres today, you know. Of course, moviegoers, we are not judging. There's no shame in being a fan. Some of us may already have our tickets. But use caution and discretion when you enjoy. Tech Republic and others are circulating a warning, courtesy of Kaspersky, that scammers are baiting their hooks with a lot of Black Widow bait. Steer clear, especially, of offers of early, free, or pirated streaming of the flick. Movies aren't distributed via executables attached to an email, nor does watching one normally require you to reveal your name, address, passwords, grandmother's maiden name, and so on. As always, viewer, beware. And now, a word from our sponsor, Barracuda. A year ago, your business may have been part of that massive shift to remote working employees. Ever since, cybercriminals have been working overtime. Now, they're leveraging activity around the COVID vaccine to disguise phishing attacks, hoping to steal money or personal information. That can cost you customers hundreds of thousands of dollars and your reputation in the marketplace. Your email gateway is good for stopping viruses, but you're defenseless against targeted attacks like phishing, account takeover, and hijacking. The Barracuda Email Threat Scanner is a free tool you can use right now to help protect your employees, your business, and your customers. The Barracuda Email Threat Scanner analyzes your Office 365 accounts and identifies malicious emails that slipped past your gateway. Find the cybersecurity threats that are hiding in your Office 365 email right now. Use the Barracuda Email Threat Scanner for free at barracuda.com/cyberwire. That's barracuda.com/cyberwire. And we thank Barracuda for sponsoring our show. Coming out of the pandemic, workplace conversations are shifting to office reopenings, who's coming back and how often. And many employees report they like the flexibility of working from home and having more control over their schedules. The folks at Unisys recently published results from their latest Digital Workplace Insights report, which looks into these issues. Leon Gilbert is Senior Vice President and General Manager of Digital Workplace Services at Unisys, and he joins us with their findings.
The creation of the report really came from where is the world going post-COVID? Right? We all knew that eventually, the vaccine would come along, and we wanted to, sponsor this report to say, okay, well, where's the world going to go with regards to work? What are people going to do after, the vaccine is complete and people start to think about what does work look like going forward? So that was our rationale for thinking about, let's do this piece of research and let's think about, what is next for digital workplace and next for employees of companies.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting report for sure. One of the things that struck me was more than once, there's some disconnects between what the employees are saying are important to them and what the business leaders are saying are important to them, or at least how they're coming at some of these questions. Can you take us through some of those things that you found?
Yeah, no, I think it's a very valid question. I think you look at some of those responses where you see the business leader says one thing and the employee says something else. But I think there are some as well, Dave, where there's a correlation, but there are absolutely some where if I take, for example, one of them where I think 51% of business leaders but 64% of employees agree that a work location schedule is most conducive to family life and an ideal experience, right? But there's only 50% of those business leaders, but 64% of the employees. So there is definitely a gap there. I think if I think about this a more holistic basis, I think the race for talent in this global economy is huge. And business leaders really need to start to really understand what their employees are looking for, and what benefits and that actually benefits them. It's no longer just a monetary discussion in my mind. I was reading something yesterday that said that I think people, even with a $30,000 salary increase, they would rather actually work from home than actually get the monetary increase, which I found, astounding when I sat back and thought about it. But actually, it's true. I think people, have found that they haven't skipped a beat since they've actually been at home, which has been hugely beneficial for companies. And I think it's opened a lot of people's eyes out. But there is still some thought process there that people have to be in the office. For me, Dave, I think it is a mix, right? You're going to get what I would term a hybrid, where you have some in the office, some at home, and you maybe do 2 days on, 3 days off. And I think that also benefits both employee and employer. And I think that's where I see this industry. I see the economy and the kind of world going. Yes, for sure, Dave. You're going to get some companies where it's 5 days a week back in the office, thinking about banking, financial institutions. But others, right, I think will be a lot more flexible, and they should be if they want to retain and attract the talent.
Yeah, some of the other findings in the report that were particularly interesting to me were you focused on communications between employers and the business leaders and how both of them value communication, but some it seemed like the leaders were having a little more challenge with communication than some of the employees were.
Yeah, I think with the advent of all of what we would term the collaboration and communications tools. Let's just take Zoom as an example, right? Zoom isn't just about talking to your grandmother and doing fitness classes, right? To me, it's about it's the way that people have learned to communicate through this pandemic, but I think it's the way that people will start to primarily will communicate going forward, whether it's Zoom or other platforms, Teams, example. But to me and to us as an organization, what is crucial is that companies need to start thinking about what is that experience, right? What is that, the two people aren't left in a disparity, right? We want digital parity, but we also want experience parity. I think that was one thing that we saw during the research is, and what's important to us is around the experience parity and whether you're in an office, whether you're at home, that you are, you have that same experience of those tools. And how you start to, you don't want it where if you're in the office, it doesn't work as well as at home. One thing we have to remember, Dave, when people start to go back to the office and start to use these tools, many offices weren't built for 200 people suddenly on video, right? So their network isn't necessarily strong enough if you think about that. So companies are going to have to start thinking about their bandwidth. How do they measure that? And does that cause a disparity between those who are actually at home versus those who are in the office? So there's lots of factors to kind of in this new hybrid world.
That's Leon Gilbert from Unisys. There's a lot more to this conversation. If you want to hear more, head on over to CyberWire Pro and sign up for Interview Selects, where you get access to this and many more extended interviews. And now, a word from our sponsor, Verizon. Mitigate the risks and realize the benefits of digital transformation with the help of Verizon, a leader in cybersecurity managed and professional services for nearly 2 decades. From secure cloud computing solutions to advanced detection and response capabilities, Verizon helps secure data, networks, and infrastructure of many of the world's best-known organizations. Their annual Data Breach Investigations report is considered the gold standard of cybercrime research. And Verizon's leadership in network, wireless, and IoT connectivity makes it uniquely capable of protecting the ever-expanding attack surface. Let Verizon help you optimize your defenses and achieve the maximum return on your security investments. Learn more at verizonenterprise.com/products/security. And joining me once again is Andrea Little Limbago. She is Vice President of Research and Analysis at Interos. Andrea, it's always great to have you back. I want to check in with you today on, I think, what we can perceive as being a growing trend of government access to data, and this whole notion of, do governments need back doors or not? What can you share with us today?
Yeah, I just completed a study looking at the country level, what governments are doing in the area of mandating government access to data. And so you can think about, on the one hand, we hear an awful lot, every single day about governments hacking into other systems and going in illegally. But for across the globe, we're really starting to see a growing trend of governments basically putting within their cybersecurity and internet laws the mandate that they can access data when they want to. And it ranges. There's a whole spectrum of, from very well codified rule of law. We need to have access. We need to show a warrant, and then we want to have access within very discrete circumstances. To basically, non-transparent. If a government comes to a company that is based in that country and says we need this data, you are required by law to turn it over. And so it has huge private sector implications, and that's one of the aspects that I really wanted to look at was as the private sector is starting to think about where they're located across the globe in different ways than they used to previously. Looking at how the regulatory frameworks of those countries should impact those decisions. And I look at this as yet another cyber risk when thinking about your global footprint. And so it is something that is growing with more and more countries starting to require that kind of access.
And to be clear here, I mean, we're talking about democracies, right? I mean, different democracies are treating this in different ways.
So it's across the board, and so that's where I'd say. So on the one hand, you have democracies that are not at all allowing a lot of this, or if they do, it's a scalpel, very transparent, all the way over to China has their law that actually was interesting that the U.S. National Counterintelligence and Security Center actually tweeted about China's laws on if you are a company and you're based in China, here's some legal frameworks you need to be aware of as far as their security laws require access to that data. And so I think it's actually interesting that we have counterintelligence aspects of our government warning about other countries' laws and access to it. But those are kind of the extremes. But within the last few days, Mauritius, which is a fairly solid democracy, if you look at on Freedom House and other kinds of democracy scales, they're a pretty solid democracy. And they just announced that they're exploring basically putting a certificate on all the laptops to do like a man-in-the-middle kind of access to encrypted data and decrypting it and having just complete access across the board if they want to. And
Where is this?
In Mauritius.
Wow.
So that's one of the ones that kind of to me is a striking outlier because it is a fairly solid democracy, but then it's taking in these tools of the authoritarian playbook, and that's what we see more and more. We see these tools being brought in. India is another good example where you have sort of this push towards greater data protection, but at the same time, internet blackouts, more surveillance going on, greater concerns about those kinds of information access and control. And so it's really, it's something absolutely keep an eye on. When we talk about the regulatory frameworks that are going on, we often think about data privacy laws, and that's great. Those are absolutely something that for companies and governments to be aware of. But sort of the reverse is there true, where under the auspices of greater security, national security, and so forth, you may have to turn over your data. And it's not just your data. It's not just asking here and there for perhaps for social media access and passwords and so forth. At times it's source code. That's Russia has the source code requirement, and so companies have had to do that. And so it diffuses across the globe. And I think that's probably one of the more troubling aspects of it is that these models and these tactics don't just stay within your the four you think about China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. But those tactics really are starting to get adopted elsewhere. I mean, Vietnam has a very strict cybersecurity law they passed in 2019 for much larger surveillance, forcing governments and companies to comply with data access when approached. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, it's a growing number that are really starting to apply a whole range of tools. And some of it's for censorship and some of it is for greater surveillance. But at the end of the day, for private companies that are doing business in those parts of the world, it's just another risk they need to be aware of.
Right. How much of this, for a global company who has their hand in businesses around the world, how much of this is based on geography and how much is based on sort of citizenship? GDPR famously reaches out to European citizens regardless of where they are. Yep.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. For a lot of these, it's within their own territory only. And so that's where you sort of the notion of digital sovereignty or cyber sovereignty, where the governments want to have that control of that information within their own borders. What we're seeing, though, and this is recently, we'll see what happens with China and their companies, they're forbidding as well now their foreign companies for turning over data abroad. And so it's almost the reverse going on too now. So at the end of the day, it's for control. And so for GDPR, it's protecting their citizens. So it's the flip side of it. For some of these other countries, it's really just complete information control as far as they possibly can, but with a focus really on within their own domestic borders. And then that's the argument. And the concern really is not only that it's going on there and that other countries may adopt that kind of model, but there's also these countries are also taking and having bigger power in some international organizations that shape the standards and norms. And so you see this when you hear about the push for cyber sovereignty at the UN, for example. It's for pushing for more of these kind of norms that allow governments to do whatever they want within their borders, have complete access and so forth, all in their auspices of sovereignty, when really it's for controlling the narrative and controlling the information. And if those are the kind of norms and laws that are the policies that start getting passed at the IGOs, that also becomes troublesome.
Yeah, I'm imagining an extreme situation when we start seeing data centers being installed in embassies.
Well, I mean, that's a big issue where the data centers are, right? I mean, that's it absolutely has huge implication for the data centers, especially when you start thinking about some of the data localization requirements and the local data storage. But yeah, where the data centers are is going to, I think that's also going to be a big component as far as starting to think about where your risks are and knowing where your data is even flowing through and what kind of access there is in those areas.
All right. Well, Andrea Little Limbago, thanks for joining us.
All right. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks to all of our sponsors for making the CyberWire possible. Could your company benefit by reaching our large and influential audience? Send us a note at thecyberwire.com/sponsor. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. If you need some companionship while you're puttering around the house this weekend, check out Research Saturday and my conversation with Daniel Katz from NortonLifeLock. We'll be discussing their research, encrypted chat apps doubling as illegal marketplaces. That's Research Saturday. Check it out. The CyberWire podcast is proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of DataTribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. Our amazing CyberWire team is Elliot Peltzman, Peru Prakash, Justin Sabi, Tim Nodar, Joe Kerrigan, Carol Terrio, Ben Yellen, Nick Valecki, Gina Johnson, Bennett Moe, Chris Russell, John Petrick, Jennifer Iben, Rick Howard, Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next week. It's time to take a moment to tell you about our sponsor, Tanium. Today, no industry is exempt from the growing threat of ransomware. Ransom attacks against critical infrastructure, private companies, and municipalities are alarmingly more frequent and pervasive in 2021. IT and security leaders must act. Understanding network assets and their status is the first step to reducing an organization's attack surface, improving cyber resilience, and accelerating incident response. Check your environment today with Tanium's free cyber hygiene assessment. Visit tanium.com/cyber-hygiene-assessment. And we thank Tanium for sponsoring our show.